Good morning, this is Dry Creek Canyon, and I'm going to break here to talk some anime.
Baccano.
Baccano is a recent light-action anime series. It has a unique storytelling style that's frenetic, violent, confusing, and kind of fun. The story opens with two characters discussing how to best tell the story, where it starts, and who the main character is. It soon becomes clear that there really is no one starting point and no one single character. In fact, there's no one single story. Most of the anime takes place in the US, and it jumps around between events in 1930 and 1932. That's the Great Depression. But unlike today's Depression, if anyone needed a stiff drink to deal with hard times back then, they couldn't get one because it was also Prohibition. This is the world of the bootleggers, liquor runners, speakeasies, and the gangsters that came with them. And Chicago is that world's capital. A couple of dozen characters wander through the story, crossing paths with others at different times. You get a sense for how many characters there are when the high-energy opening credits identify no fewer than 17 of them by name, and that still doesn't include everyone who's involved. That makes this anime hard to discuss because I can't really focus on any one character or storyline. Events will finally reach a climax one night aboard a train traveling from Chicago to New York, the Flying Pussyfoot. I'd ask if anyone remembered when trains had names just like ships do, such as the Gulf Wind, the Silver Comet, the Peoria Rocket, and the Heartland Flyer. It might be easier to ask if anyone still remembers passenger trains. There are half a dozen plots tangling up each other in Baccano. One concerns a pair of light-hearted thieves, a sort of Bonnie and Clyde meet Robin Hood. They are also not the quickest engines on the track. They're using the Flying Pussyfoot as a getaway after robbing the mob back in Chicago, thinking that makes this a train robbery. Some people boarded the Pussyfoot to take hostages for ransom, some to steal a bomb, some to protect a loved one, some to assassinate an enemy, and one just because she loves stowing away on trains. Some characters just like to kill. There's another major storyline that takes place in the streets of Chicago before the train leaves the station, loosely about a search for a serum of immortality, the product of some old alchemy. This involves some of the characters who'll be on the train, and some of the events that happen here will affect what happens on the train. Some of the characters are already immortals. Blow an immortal's head off with a Tommy gun, and they reassemble like Alucard. This story isn't told before the later events on the train, but instead it's just shuffled into the deck, a bunch of flashbacks and jumping around in time. There are half a dozen other times and storylines that are mixed in with this, and if that isn't enough, both Chicago and the Flying Pussyfoot are large enough that events can happen at the same time in different places. The anime jumps around between all these interwoven stories, fragmented flashbacks intercut with wild abandon. It's as if someone dropped all the storyboards and didn't bother to sort them all back into order. It makes for a confusing, fragmented tale that only begins to weave a coherent tapestry towards the end. And yet, it's that plot jumping that provides the story with much of its mystery, energy, and fun. All these tales have a light tone, certainly not a comedy, but not a serious drama either, and it's awfully violent. Baccano can't be separated from this choppy, multi-path storytelling style, but if you're willing to let the early parts of the story just wash over you without insisting exactly what's going on or who's who, it turns into a really fun ride. By the way, Baccano is often very violent and bloody. There's plenty of guns and knives, shooting, stabbings, torture, dismemberment, and bloody mayhem. Google translated the Italian word Baccano as noise, rowdiness, turmoil. This anime is certainly all of that. I think the title also works as a homonym in Japanese. With over 20 characters sharing screen time, it takes some time to get to know any of them. Figuring out what they're doing will take even longer, but we will get to know a hand of them and come to like a few of them. Baccano is directed by Takahiro Mori, who previously helmed Hellgirl. It's based on some light novels by Ryogo Narita. The anime series continuity and scriptwriting is credited Noboru Takagi, who I suppose is responsible for keeping all the threads of this hyperactive story straight. The artwork in Baccano is modestly interesting. The character designs are fairly ordinary. I found it hard to tell some of the gangsters apart since they all wear the same style clothing and hats and hairstyles. But the scenes are composed in interesting ways, and the buildings, trains, and streets of Chicago are surprisingly detailed for a TV show and steeped in a lot of shadows. Also, the artists have chosen some unusual viewing angles for their story. The animation in many of the action scenes is fast and smooth, though the exposition is pretty standard lip stabbing. As if the fast-paced, huge cast and parallel storylines and quick jumps in time weren't enough to keep us busy, the animators insist on crossing the stage line to give us even more disoriented.
Start with an interesting establishing shot looking down from the ceiling of the Flying Pussyfoot's dining car. On the train, high, low, and tight shots emphasize the cramped space inside the cars. Usually, shots of this sort of conversation would stay on one side of the stage line, but here it swings around to the far side, and then it swings around again. Just another trick to add a little bit to the confusion. And in the passenger stateroom, a set of tight shots keeps us cramped while it crosses the line.
The stage line isn't one of those absolute rules of cinema, like always take off the lens cap. It's more a guideline. By jumping shots around this way, Baccano keeps us from feeling comfortable even in the long conversations. Baccano was pretty careful with its period designs. It probably used a lot of old gangster movies and newsreel footage to get the 30s clothing, cars, and streets right. In a quick shot set in California, they even had the old sign of Los Angeles hillsides reading Hollywoodland. But one of those trivia things old geezers notice, in the final episode, there are a lot of flags hanging in old New York. They knew not to use the 50-star flag back in 1932, but for some reason they picked the 49-star flag. That design was only used in 1959, between the time Alaska became a state and Hawaii followed in 1960. By the way, the 48-star flag was created in 1912 after my Arizona became a 48th state. Baccano's opening music by Paradise Lunch quickly establishes the period in pacing with a jazzy upbeat. The interior music by Makoto Ishimori takes a similar style. I often thought that it was appropriately reminiscent of the Broadway musical Chicago, which was also set during the Prohibition era. Funimation's English dub is interesting. It doesn't play badly when you stick to it. They have changed some of the tone and style of a lot of the voices compared to the original Japanese cast. You don't want to jump back and forth between soundtracks because the different voice stylings give different spins on some of the characters. But at least no one tries to channel Edward G. Robinson or James Cagney. Because that wouldn't be right, see? I give Baccano 4 stars. I found it a lot of fast-paced, violent, and chaotic fun. It took me a while to get used to its non-linear style of storytelling and the huge cast of characters, but it did deliver an entertaining ride and some satisfying conclusions. Funimation has released the 16 episodes of Baccano in the US on a set of 4 DVDs. The main story actually runs 13 episodes. You'll figure that out for yourself when you put in the final DVD, and everything seems to be wrapping up just about 15 minutes in. There are 3 episodes of After Story that never ran on TV that are included on these DVDs. It picks up after the main story, though it saves some flashbacks to fill in a few of the characters' backgrounds some more. Each of Funimation's DVDs has 1 episode with a commentary track by the English ADR director and a couple of the voice actors.
Thanks for listening.